This video is brought to you by Aptoid, where you can download mediocre games and save 15 to 35% on your in-game purchases using Appcoins. Use the promo code REDWIFI and start saving now.
Let's do this.
Rest in peace, headphone users, and welcome back to the Ultimate Evony Defense Guide, Part 2, where I will explain why Tier 1s are the best units in Evony, and it's not even close. This video will cover how to make the ideal Tier 1 keep, how it works, including different Tier 1 troop arrangements, the number of troops you need, and finally, how to counter it. The first part of this video is designed so you and I can share with members of our alliances to turn them into free-to-play keeps capable of ruining the game for heavy coiners on par with that of Evony developers themselves. Before we get started, we have to define what winning a battle is. So if you look at this battle report, who would you say has won? Now it does say victory, and it was a successful defense. The attacker lost more power, but you cannot tell who won this battle because the attacker here sent Tier 11 siege, and the defender lost Tier 4 siege. And now Tier 4, compared to Tier 11, give more points in SVS and Battlefield per power. So in fact, the attacker won the point exchange in this SVS or Battlefield scenario. So I added this to my simulator to take a closer look at what's going on. And here we have 6 million Tier 11 versus 200 million Tier 4 siege. Now, obviously, there's going to be more troops involved in this. However, when you send a Tier 11 siege march, they're going to attack the lower tier siege first of the enemy. This is because lower tier siege, the Tier 1 through Tier 4, have a low range, and they have to move closer in the battlefield in order to reach the enemy. Tier 11 happen to have that sweet spot range where they will target the Tier 1s through Tier 4s before they target the higher tier siege. And I will go into more detail in a later video on how range and speed works. Spoiler alert, speed skill books are still useless. However, moving on, we see that the Tier 11s killed the 36 million Tier 4s, 180 million power, and they won on the point exchange. If we change these Tier 4s to Tier 1s, because we realize that Tier 4s are a bit of a liability because they give away so many points, the Tier 1s still win, but the Tier 11s obviously take out a lot more troops because Tier 1s are weaker. And in terms of power, the Tier 11s take out more power. But when you look at the point exchange, the Tier 1s won this quite handedly. And all we did was change from Tier 4 to Tier 1. We didn't change any buffs or anything like that. When we take a look at the base stats, we'll notice that Tier 1s are worth only 1 point in SPS versus Tier 15, which are worth 70 times that much. Now, Battlefield points are just a multiplier of 2.2, so this is going to be the same among both of them. So Tier 15s have to justify being worth 70 times more than Tier 1s, and they can't. They're not 70 times stronger. They are way more than 70 times to train or heal. And when we look at another battle simulation, and this is Tier 1s through Tier 15s, now what I did is I put 7,000 Tier 1s here, 100 Tier 15s, and that is 70 times more. So these are worth the same amount in terms of Battlefield points. And what I did was I gave the Tier 15 3,000% buffs on everything, which I would say resembles a K40, if a K40 can even reach this much. And the Tier 1 is like a K33 with Achaemenid gear with the highest flights they can get. So when we look at this battle, we can tell that the Tier 1s won, and they won in terms of point exchange. So Tier 1s are just superior on so many metrics, with the obvious drawback being that you have a limited march capacity, and therefore you can't send a billion Tier 1s to burn someone, no matter how glorious that may seem. So Tier 1s are primarily used defensively and not offensively. However, they are viable to use offensively. You can get a general, put flat refines on their gear, and attack players that are over a billion power and come out positive by just sending Tier 1 marches at them. Now, you could do this on a Tier 1 march, or you could do a Tier 1 rally. And even though it will only take a little bit of power off of them, you are coming out positive. And you could do this multiple times and whittle away their power slowly. So the reason you should transition to a Tier 1 defense instead of just ghosting is because Evony has implemented features into the game to punish players who ghost. One such feature, which is quite prominent, is their latency anti-ghosting program. So let's go over how to make the most common and most potent Tier 1 defense, and that is the mounted troop defense. This will be a basic guide that can be modified as you see fit, and we'll break down the purpose of every troop later in the video. So with ground troops, you want no more than 10,000 of every ground troop. Archers, you want at least 100,000 archers in each layer, and you can make many more. With siege, 100,000 siege, but not too many, and 10 to 1,000 mounted units above Tier 1. And with Tier 1s, you want to make as many Tier 1s as you can. And once you approach about 100 million Tier 1s, you can start transitioning into Tier 2s and Tier 3s. Equip your Wall General and Sub-Siege Generals with Achaemenid with debuff gear. Refine your Wall General gear and your Dragon with flat buffs for your mounted units. This is flat HP, flat defense, and when it comes to attack, you can make flat attack buffs for mounted and archers, and maybe even siege if you get a good siege refine, and make a march preset to heal 10 of every troop, so you can recover your layers after every attack. Alright, so let's go over the purpose of these troop numbers that I've given you. The ground troops will get wiped out by a ground or mounted attack, and you don't want to donate points to the enemy. The purpose of these layers are to act as protective layers, as well as possibly taking out the enemy frontline protective layers. At 10,000, it is enough to survive attacks from the most common 1,000 troop layers players send, but it's low enough to not receive too many wounded. The archers in your defense are to wipe out the enemy protective layers as well as attack the main forces of the enemy. They do all of this while hiding behind your Tier 1 horses. And feel free to make as many archer units as you want, as they are a safe way to increase your defensive capabilities, and they won't leave you vulnerable. This is because the enemy would have to go through all your siege layers to get to your archers, or they'll have to get through all your Tier 1s to get to your archers. And siege has the same function as archers, but they have one caveat. They can be targeted by enemy siege, so I don't recommend making too many, as an enemy attack can easily go to the enemy's favor. You want to be able to kill the enemy's protective layers in one round of battle, while not making yourself too vulnerable to siege attacks. So when we cover a scenario where you get attacked by mounted or ground, and both of them are pretty similar in what happens, the enemy mounted and ground units, they're going to target your ground units first, which means that if they set 3 million mounted units and 3 different layers, their Tier 14s are going to kill your Tier 14 ground units, and their Tier 13s are going to attack your Tier 13 ground units, and their Tier 12s are going to attack your Tier 12s. Well, that will now leave the Tier 11s, Tier 10s, and Tier 9s, and most enemies generally don't put too high of layers in those. Those are going to be about 10,000 troops each or 1,000 troops each, and they're not going to be able to take out your Tier 11s, your Tier 10s, and Tier 9s. So what's going to happen is that will leave the enemy taking out about 30,000 of your ground troops, and the rest of your troops will attack them and take out their layers and take out whatever troops they have in their main forces. And then it's going to be their next turn. Then their next turn, their Tier 14s are going to attack your Tier 11s. Their Tier 13s are going to attack your Tier 10s, and so on. And this is going to waste several of their turns, and all they're getting is protective layers. They're not going to be able to take out that many troops. At the same time, you will completely wipe out their protective layers, and your archers and your Tier 1 mounted troops are going to be taking out those main forces. So I've had several players with Tier 1 mounted defenses tell me that ground marches destroy them, and they want to know why. What can they do better? The first thing I asked them is to see their wall general so I can look at their refines. Most players use the Tier 1 mounted defense as arrow fodder. It's just to protect them from ranged marches. So the ranged marches just stop at the mounted troops and can't go any further. Now, it is somewhat viable, but you want to give yourself some mounted attack refines, especially for these ground troops. And I'm going to give you an example. Here we have 100 million Tier 1 mounted, and through the calculator, we can tell you that you'll kill about 24,000 ground troops. And these ground troops have 2,500 buffs on everything. So when we change the buffs, and here we have the opponent, and here's their buffs right here for their ground units. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at our mounted buffs, and we're going to change from 3,000 on our flat to 10,000. And let's see what happens. Let's go back to the calculator, and we went from killing 24,000 to 124,000. And that's such a huge amount. So every turn, your tier 1 are going to be taking out 124,000 of their tier 14, along with your archers and your siege and every other unit. This will help take out those ground a little bit quicker. So along that line, let's also discuss the top amount of mounted troops you should make. So here's 100 million. Let's say instead of 100 million, we had 400 million. Now we're taking out 500,000 tier 14 ground every turn. And you can scale this up. We can say instead of 4, we could put 8 here. And now we're taking about 1 million ground troops every turn. And this is going to obliterate a ground march that hits you. But it only matters if you have those attack refines. Now, once you get to an absurd amount of mounted troops, and trust me, this will happen, where players will get 8 billion mounted troops. I've seen 6 billion. It's pretty insane. You're never going to fight this many tier 14s unless you're fighting a K-45 that's sending a giant march at you. So what you could do at this point is you can lower your attack refines and put it into range or something else at this point. This is a bit overkill. What's good about taking out an entire tier 14, or honestly, this could be tier 15 at this point, march, is that you will not lose with counter damage on troops. And if you don't know what counter damage is, I made a video with it in my mechanic video. Basically, if you don't kill an entire layer in one hit, you will receive wounds and lose troops because of that. Moving on from refines, let's talk about wall generals and what is the best wall general for your tier 1 mounted defense. And there is none. I get it. A lot of you are going to say Boudica or Boudica, whatever her name is. And I'm going to tell you that's not true. It doesn't really matter. What matters is the equipment refines. See, Boudica gives your mounted troops percent buffs, and tier 1s don't care about percent buffs. They don't really help them out that much. So what's happening is you are now investing in this general that is putting a lot of buffs into troops that you're not even going to have in your keep. You're not going to have a bunch of tier 14s and tier 13s in your keep. So they're not going to benefit from these percent buffs. So let's compare Boudica to Zachary Taylor. Both of these you could find in the relics right now. And Zachary Taylor is an archer wall defense general. If we were to level them up, enhance them, cultivate them, max out their specialties, Boudica will give your tier 1 mounted troops an extra 707 attack, 457 defense, and 1,516 HP. And that is less than the refines you get on your gear. Zachary Taylor would give your tier 1 mounted troops 484 attack, 390 defense, and 977 HP. So look at the difference between these and ask yourself, is investing into Boudica really worth it? When you can invest these Blood of Ares into your marching generals, into your subsidy generals, into your duty generals, which would have a much better effect. So we've been talking about tier 1 mounted, but let's compare it to tier 1 ground, tier 1 archers, and tier 1 siege. So tier 1 ground have a great HP and defense, and they would make a great wall, though they do have a lousy attack. The biggest reason that people don't use tier 1 ground over tier 1 mounted is due to ranged attacks. Archers are going to shoot right over the ground units and hit your mounted units, and after they're done attacking your mounted units, they're going to go after your archers. So tier 1 ground don't protect that very well. However, you can still use them and make a defense strategy around them. Now, tier 1 archers are lousy at soaking up any damage. They are the last units attacked. However, if you have flat refines on archer attack, tier 1 archers actually can do a significant amount of damage for a very cheap troop. Tier 1 siege is great for soaking up damage from mid-tier siege, as we showed earlier in this video. However, their range is not that great, which makes it so that they're mostly attacking the enemy ground forces, and they're not going to be doing that much damage due to enemies' ground high defense, high HP, and the troop modifier Siege has against ground. 15 minutes in this video, and I finally get to talk about how to counter Tier 1 defenses. If you're expecting some super secret amazing strategy, I don't have one. There's plenty of variables to go over, and Tier 1 defenses are never the same. However, Tier 1 defenses hate rallies. They hate rapid attacks and siege attacks. Your goal in taking out a Tier 1 defense is to take out their protective layers and don't give them an opportunity to heal. Trick them into unghosting their troops and punish them hard. Naturally, Tier 1 defenses have poor buffs on all the other troops, so you're going to want to go after those first. For rallies, send a mix. Send a siege, send some archers to put damage on the mounted, and send a ground or mounted along with that. And how to choose ground or mounted is really going to depend on their archer composition and their buffs that they have, whether they have flat refines on archers or mounted, and you don't know, so it's a guessing game. Rapid attacks are similar to rallies, but it's basically throwing all your marchers at them at once so that they can't heal layers in between. Healing those layers really do make a difference. And if you attack with siege, then ground or mounted and range in that order, your ranged troops will really only have to deal with the Tier 1 mounted. And the Tier 1 mounted can only take out one layer at a time. And that's 14 layers of ground, 14 layers of mounted. That's 28 turns that your archers are going to have to take out those mounted troops. And if you scout them and you see that they're ghosting their mounted, you can send a slow fake march with the blue dragon, showing that you're about to hit them and they're possibly going to unghost their mounted troops in preparation for that, and then you just hit them with an archer attack. The same thing can happen if they were ghosting their ground troops. Send an archer or siege attack, let them respond to it, and then hit them hard with mounted. Okay, well that will wrap up this video. However, you will not want to miss my next video where I explain the speed and range mechanics and tell you how Evony has been lying to you about range and speed values for the troops. I'm not kidding. They have been lying to us. I'm also making a monster calculator so you can determine how many troops you will need to kill any monster. All the monster stats and hidden values in the game, this will also help you increase your world boss score. So I've been working on something big, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out. I plan on streaming and answering your questions and going over battle reports. These videos take an enormous amount of time to make, so I appreciate your support and thank you to everyone out there. Boudica.